what do we do with Facebook? First of all, is Facebook in the wrong? Many people would say absolutely. Of course, as a platform, they've not done enough to remove hate. But then there are others who feel that Facebook has become the sovereign state of Facebook, bigger than countries. So how do you end the sale of hate for profit, which many people say that it has been involved in? First, let me quickly tell you a suggestion that has come in. There's a write-up written by noted journalist Veer Sanghvi, and he says, Veer is now with us. Thank you so much, Veer, for joining us. But before we come to you, let's quickly show you excerpts of this write-up by Veer. What does he argue? What does he say? Is Facebook the biggest problem? And how do you solve this problem? His article says, breaking Facebook could perhaps be one of the solutions, or many would argue the only solution. And we have to go back in history. In 1911, the US Supreme Court ruled that the powerful Standard Oil company be broken up. 1911, ladies and gentlemen. The original giant was broken up into 34 companies. Many of those companies are now called Chevron, Exxon, and Mobil, which emerged from the breakup, and they are also huge companies, if I may add. If data is the new oil, Veer argues, can we do something similar with Facebook? I think that is food for thought. Why? Because Facebook's worth is $500 billion, Veer. $500 billion is their net worth, which, by the way, is more than the GDP of most countries in Africa. Let's quickly go to Veer. Veer, do you think that the only way to make Facebook accountable as they transcend borders, as they've become this big, country unto itself, is going to be breaking them up?
I don't see an alternative, Sanket. We had that situation. You've quoted the John D. Rockefeller example. We had the situation at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, when industrialization created these huge corporations, and they were run by what in America were called the robber barons, people who were so rich that they could buy anybody, institutions that were so powerful that nobody could do anything to them. And finally, the US Supreme Court intervened and insisted that Standard Oil should be broken up, and many others were broken up. I'm arguing that at the beginning of the 21st century, we're in a similar situation. The digital revolution has created new giants, and this is worse than what happened with Standard Oil, because Standard Oil was a purely American affair. This is global. These are institutions and corporations that know no country, they know no national border, they respect nothing. And because they appeal to you and me directly through our phones or our computers, it's very difficult to police them. The only way you can actually handle them is to break them down into smaller units. Now, how you do this is up to you. One suggestion is that Facebook includes WhatsApp, which in India perhaps is the real problem. It includes Instagram. Perhaps you break these up, make them separate corporations. Of course, the existing shareholders get compensation for it, but control shifts, which is the Standard Oil pattern. Alternatively, you change geographical locations, that Facebook becomes a separate company in Asia, say, run by somebody else. But unless you do that, these corporations are growing. At the moment, Facebook is banned in China and is not that big in India. Yeah. Once it gets bigger in India, which is the intention, it's going to be unstoppable. The US government won't be able to touch it, and we, of course, can't touch it anyway.
No, Veer, but then why would any government want to do this? As of this moment, it's only the US, which is the home to Facebook. Only the US can do something like this. I would want to ask you, why would a US do this?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, there's a lot of evidence, and Facebook has also admitted wrongdoing, suggesting that at the last election, Facebook played a very crucial role in Donald Trump's victory. So obviously, Trump is not going to do it. But if there is a change at the helm, if, for instance, Biden gets elected in the next election, then I think there is enough public pressure. There's enough demand within Congress, enough concerns about hate speech. I mean, Facebook's own position, for the record, is not that it stops hate speech, is that it's trying, but it's not really got there yet. So, I mean, do you want to wait for Mark Zuckerberg to come and tell you, okay, I think I've got there? Or do you just want to take direct action? I think that's the question. And the liberal consensus in America would be no corporation should have that much power.
Veer, two quick questions. Question number one, and this is again I've noted from your piece, your write-up. You talk about how it is only in the interest of Facebook to not act against people or individuals because it means business. It will mean traction. It will mean business. It will mean more data, right? In a situation like this, what does a country like India do?
Well, frankly, if you do some local stuff, like for instance, you put limits on WhatsApp, which they were going to, but which have not been effective. If you stop Facebook from raising funds, if you prevent the way in which it operates within India, there's a certain amount of stuff you can do. But the problem is this, because Facebook is so powerful, because it has so much money, and more important, because it has the influence to swing elections, to change people's minds, which government, I mean, it's not a BJP Congress thing, it's a political thing. Yeah. Which government would try and rein in Facebook when they could cooperate with Facebook for their own ends? That, I think, is the real problem.
And that is a problem the world over? It's not just an India only problem?
No, in fact, the Wall Street Journal article that the BJP is so agitated about quotes examples of Vietnam and other countries where regimes have done deals with Facebook and Facebook has gone along.
Let me ask you this, Veer. My final question. Now there is, this talk about inviting these people or bringing them, asking them to come, summoning them to a parliamentary standing committee, demands of a JPC probe. Realistically speaking, as of this moment, what can the Indian establishment do?
Well, first of all, that depends on how you define the Indian establishment. At the moment, the establishment is the government and it doesn't want to do anything. But if you're going to take the rest of the political establishment, there isn't much it can do, A, because the government is so clearly on Facebook's side. And B, even if that wasn't the case, what can you really do? What kind of limits can you put on them? The US government has tried. Mark Zuckerberg appears before committees of US Congress and says, look, hate speech is very bad. I'm going to do my best to try and stamp it out. But you know it's a continuing process. He apologizes, he goes off, and life goes on as always. If that's what happens in America, what do you think the Delhi Assembly will do? What do you think the Indian Parliament will do?
But now that's a very, do you see, I mean, I sense a degree of hopelessness in your argument. But surely something can be done. Beyond this point, do you think public awakening can perhaps be a very important point of inflection?
Well, public awakening is one of those dangerous things because you look at the responses to my article on social media today. People have said, yeah, I want to get off Facebook. It's very dangerous. But on the other hand, they have invested in Facebook. Their friends are on Facebook. Their lives are on Facebook.
And they're sharing your write-up also on Facebook.
I've noticed that, yeah. And WhatsApp, I mean, which of us can easily give up WhatsApp? So much of what we do is on WhatsApp. So Facebook's in a really strong position. I don't really think there will be any public opinion against it.
So division the only option? Breakup?
I would think so. I mean, there have been many, the debate's gone on in America for a long time. There have been many suggestions, but this is the one I think that's emerged as the only one that's likely to work. And this is the one, as a matter of interest, that Facebook is fighting the hardest, which should tell you something.
So what happened to oil in 1911, and if data is the new oil, this should be the same thing that can happen and can reign in Facebook in 2020, argues Veer in his write-up. Veer, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a joy to be on your show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. That brings us to the end of this edition of Trending Tonight.